Hello and welcome to the summer series. We actually had a day off yesterday and I'm still not in the office, although I look like it. I'm currently trying to get married. Hadn't ever wanted to get married for 40 years and finally met the love of my life, and our wedding got destroyed by COVID. We're trying to elope with just our parents down in Devon right now. So whilst we had yesterday off, an opportunity arose that I jumped upon. The awesome people at the surgery ran a panel debate earlier today, all around talking about race in the workplace. An incredibly important topic, and one we want to keep the momentum around. So Carly Murray has really awesomely offered and given us the recording of that panel debate to share with you, our inspirers and our Inspiring Workplaces community. So without further ado, I'll be back on Monday talking with Jason Lawrenson, hopefully married. But for now, I'm going to leave you to the panel debate from the surgery. Thank you to Carly Murray. Thank you to all the awesome panelists. Have a great weekend and see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Just get everybody a chance to join. Welcome, everybody. Hi, everyone. We're just giving everybody a chance to join, and then we will get started. Hey, Gary. Glad that everyone can hear us, which is good. Thank you for confirming that, Gary. Please do use the chat to say hello. Hey, Carice. Andrea. Hey, Joyce. Hey, May, Ian, Kate. Rose, Jamie, hello. Dante, Sabrina. I'm not going to be able to keep up quick enough. Okay, so we've got about 45 people and still coming in, so we'll just give people one more minute. Hey, Lilette. Hey, Lynn. Welcome, everybody. We're just giving people a minute or two to get in and get settled. Gary, we had about 130, 140 people signed up. So yeah, great attendance, and obviously we'll be recording it today, so anybody who misses it, we'll make it available. Hey, Rahana. Welcome, everyone. If you just joined, we're just giving people 1 minute just to join and get settled. Hey, Sabine. Hey, Shelby. Yes, Shelby, automatically muted. So we're going to be using the chat today and also the Q&A function. You're welcome, Shelby. Okay, so the attendee count has started to slow down, so I might get going. Okay, so I think we will get going. So hi everyone, I'm Carly Murray. I'm from The Surgery. We're a creative comms agency. And this is a special edition of Barn to Boardroom. Barn to Boardroom started about 6 years ago. And the idea behind it was bringing people together, typically from internal comms, engagement, HR, to kind of share their experiences, their challenges and ideas, but all in a really relaxed and informal environment. Barn to Boardroom normally takes place in a beautiful barn in the West Sussex countryside. Obviously that couldn't happen this year. So we took it virtual last month. And Richard, who will be on our panel today, he joined us and spoke very briefly about Black Lives Matter. And what was really clear is that everybody wanted to talk about it some more. So that's led us to being here today. So personally, I have been trying to talk about race to my friends and family, and it's hard. And when it comes to talking about race in the workplace, I honestly don't know how to go about it, and I'm worried about getting it wrong. But thankfully, I'm connected to Uzma and to Kate and to Richard, and so I can go to them and ask their advice. So that's what I'd love to get out of the conversation today, is some real practical advice for how you talk about race in the workplace for myself and for everyone listening, and to kind of get a bit of a confidence boost. So we really want to create a safe space for everybody today. So, if you want to, don't worry if, if you're commenting or you're asking a question and it feels awkward, it feels uncomfortable, it really doesn't matter. I think, we need to use this kind of environment to get us past some of that, because that's the reality of how it's going to feel in the workplace. So really quick preamble from me, because I just want to get into the conversation. I want to welcome our panel today and let them introduce themselves. So a really warm welcome to Uzma Mohammadali. Uzma.
Thanks, Carly. Hi, so my name's Uzma Mohammadali. I'm a change in communications expert with almost 20 years experience in designing and implementing large-scale change programs across several industries. Actually based in Europe. I think you can see it's quite sunny, and I've been working in Switzerland for the past 4 years. My most recent role was with the pharma giant Roche, and there I was the executive communications lead supporting senior leaders for the 15,000 strong commercial division. And now, like in all the organizations that I've worked for and all my clients, they pretty much say the same thing, which is they want all their employees' voices to be heard, to be supported, to be valued. And even though people of color have been part of the workforce for decades, this talk about race is completely taboo and actually only gets airtime when there are major racial incidents. And so one of the reasons why I'm here, and this is quite personal, is that I had a conversation with my dad only a few weeks ago. And he basically opened up and shared his experience of autism and microaggressions over a 40-year period as a chief control officer. And what we had in common was this sort of strategy to blend in, to not rock the boat, to keep our heads down, keep playing by the rules of the majority. And actually, that conversation deeply touched me, and it humbled me, and it made me realize two things. One, that I must continue to speak up about this, and two, is that we need allies who can champion this cause of equality, because we can't do it ourselves. And so much like your hope, Carly, my hope over the next 90 minutes is amongst the four of us and, through the audience. My hope is that you feel more confident to talk about this pretty sensitive topic in your own workplaces. So thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Isma. And a really warm welcome to Kate Asiche.
Hi everyone, thank you, Carly. My name is Kate Asiche. I am an internal communication consultant with, like Uzma, over 20 years experience working across the organizations like Aon, Medtronic, EasyJet, Sage, in director of EMEA or Europe, or ECA, which is Europe and Central Asia role. So I have quite a lot of corporate experience and a corporate background. In terms of what I'd like to get out of the next 90 minutes, it's a nice conversation, a fruitful one. I want it to be useful for everyone. And I'm really keen to create a safe space for everyone on this call, on this webinar, to discuss what's on their mind. I don't want anyone to be afraid or feel timid to talk about whatever they feel to talk about, because that's where the problem ends, with a reluctance to broach the subjects that continuously don't get broached. And the reason why we are today, with very little movement since the original civil rights movement 50, 60 years ago, is because we don't want to have these conversations very often, and people feel reluctant to share, or they don't want to feel stupid or foolish. I want to plead with all of you on this session to not feel foolish, or to not feel, we're not to judge. We're not here to judge. We're not in a position to judge. So I'd love for everyone to come at this in a very honest and open way, say what's in their mind, and hopefully get something great from it. So yeah, thank you.
Definitely, Kate. Thank you so much. So you might have noticed that we are temporarily missing our third panel member. So I'll introduce him. He is joining us. He's just dealing with something very important in his day job at the moment. So it's Richard Etienne, and he is the Deputy Head of Internal Communication at the Department for International Trade, and he also heads up a BAME network there. So hopefully by the time we get into some of the questions, Richard will have joined us. What we wanted to do just very quickly was just get a feeling for where you are at currently in talking about race in the workplace, completely anonymous. So we're just going to launch a very quick poll to see where you're at. I think that would be interesting for us. And if the words don't apply to you in terms of where you're currently at, just think of it as a kind of a 1 to 5, 1 is low, 5 is high scale in terms of where you're at. So, okay, so a lot of people in the educating themselves space, which is great. Okay, great. So some of you, okay, so some of you are at that stage of trying to get the support that you need. Tentatively started for about 30% of you, and then about 15% kind of well into it, 5% kind of keep focused on kind of keeping it going. Okay, thank you so much. That's really useful for us. Helps kind of frame the conversation. So I have got a few questions that I'm going to pose to the panel, but would really like you to use the Q&A function to ask your own questions, and you can comment on other people's questions, and you can upvote, I guess, the priority questions that you're most interested in hearing about. So my first question, and I'm going to start with you, Uzma, is, so, you know, you're passionate about wanting to drive a conversation about race in the workplace. So where do you start?
Great, just unmute myself there first. So actually, I am going to start to answer your question by turning it on its head first and asking what's stopping you from starting right now. Because diversity makes good business sense, and yet it's not treated as a key business issue that affects the bottom line. And one of the reasons that this happens, in my opinion, is that leaders theoretically understand the positive impact of D&I on innovation and on creativity, but also in the same breath claim that they're colorblind. And that effectively means that they're saying, I'm not biased, I embrace diversity, change. But if you believe this, how can you start to fix something that you just can't see? So add to this that most organizations believe that they are meritocracies. And it's a great narrative. And I faithfully stuck to it for practically all my professional life. So, we were saying almost 20 years. And it goes something along the lines of let's focus on our similarities and not on our differences. And working hard is all that matters. But you know what? Those differences need to be talked about. They need to be addressed, because the reality is that racial groups and ethnic minority groups are frequently treated differently. So we don't often have equal access to the same opportunities as our white counterparts. That could be a promotion, that could be a stretch assignment, that could be high profile speaking engagements, or just having our name repeatedly said in different meetings all the time, somebody advocating for us. And this unwritten story of just work hard and you'll get there is like so effective that it actually doesn't motivate organizations to look at this problem deeply. And so I think that, this issue that's kind of stopping anyone from starting is about shifting mindsets. I love that in the poll that people are saying educating myself about it first is a priority, because if we are shifting mindsets, it starts with ourselves. But if your company or your client is really ready to tackle this issue, and I can see in the poll there are other questions that are touching this area, I've got a couple of thoughts about what you can do. So I think the first thing to do is really it's quite basic, but it's recognize that there's a problem. And by that, I mean interrogate reality, paint a picture of what's happening right now, and take personal responsibility, for yourself, and ask yourself, in this whole picture, what's my role? And it sounds a bit American, but own it. And by that, I mean, if you don't like what you see, then basically do as I did, which was listen, educate, talk to people, and actually commit to a personal journey of change. It's not a passive thing. And so secondly, what I want to say is that leaders are quite important in this whole area, and there will be groups who already advocate for change. My advice is encourage them. Some of these leaders will have already gone on the same emotional journey that you've been on, and they can be your allies. So give them a share of voice in your communications. And actually the same with networks. So collaborate and create solutions together with your D&I networks, with your multicultural networks. Ask for their advice, and also test solutions with them, because you might design something much better way beyond your initial expectations. So get them involved. And I would say my third bit of advice is like whatever forum you go for, design for dialogue and not for debate, because talking about race, and I find it now, talking about race is such a personal and an emotive issue. If you go down the route of a debate, sort of win-lose kind of conversation, you'll just definitely not get the insights, as productive insights that you need to go forward.
Thank you, Isma. I mean, that point about, I guess, colour blindness. I know that before I was educating myself about this, actually people who said, I don't see colour, kind of saw that as a positive, but now I understand so much better why that's not helpful.
Great.
Thank you so much. So, Kate, same question over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I was nodding, viciously then when Isma was talking, because I agree wholeheartedly with the idea that you have to be ready. So there has to be a certain understanding that there's a problem already, and that needs to be a problem that's addressed in some respect. So the idea of coming at it from a position where you feel as though you've already got the solutions is the biggest mistake. From my perspective, what I would look to do is to just have an open forum where you create a safe space, and it's really important, that word safe, to have an open and honest discussion. And I said the same thing about this session that we're having now. It's the most important thing to me, because I've seen many forums, many meetings, many sessions where the agenda is already set. The leadership who have organized the meeting have already designed what they want it to be. They have designed what they want the outcomes to be. And it won't work, especially now. Perhaps it did in the past, and they felt it worked, but I can guarantee you that attendees, or some attendees, would certainly not agree that it was working for them. And so the first thing I would say is create a safe space for a frank and honest conversation. And also, don't think that one size fits all, because I've seen that mistake happen many times before, where they feel as though there's already a forum in place. We have a D&I network, we have a BAME, as they call it. BAME, sorry to say this, but BAME is a term I really dislike, because it just categorizes everyone as this one group. And what it doesn't allow for is certain voices to be heard. So if you are, for example, in a room where there are people who are coming at it from a religious perspective, in terms of a D&I network, or a sexual perspective, or a country perspective, then you're not going to have the conversations that you need to have. You must allow for the idea of being Black as a particular subject matter to be discussed. So I've seen the whole idea of Blackness being thrown in with religion, with sexuality, and that's not right, and it's very unfair, because what you're doing there is you're not allowing for a particular group to have a conversation, and they are a particular group. So what will happen there, and I've seen it before, is that you'll get offshoots, you'll get segregated groups who will decide on their own, through their own volition, to have a separate group, and it won't be within the remit of the organization. It will be outside of the organizational structure, which is dangerous in some respects, because they aren't endorsed, and there's no leadership sponsorship. So to allow that natural allegiance to happen. If people do want to create a particular group of people to have a discussion and have allegiances within themselves, then allow that to happen within the initial forum, and ensure that there are no rules in place. A natural conversation is allowed to happen. And I warn you to be prepared for what will happen as a result of creating that environment. It will be raw, it will be uncomfortable. I don't think it will be particularly enjoyable. So I think it's a mistake to come at it and think, well, we're going to have a good time here, because you probably won't. And what I would say to really bear in mind is that for people like myself, relaying and talking about experiences which are quite negative is very painful. It's not fun time for me to relay what I've been through. So it's all very well saying, well, tell us what's wrong, but we've told this many, many times. I've told many people what's wrong. I've given my experience many times, and it's painful, because you have to relive the trauma. And reliving the trauma is more than uncomfortable. It's actually, you're having the trauma all over again. So it's a traumatic experience to relive the trauma. So you must bear that in mind. And I think it's worthwhile considering that the Black people in the room may not want to share their experiences. They may not want to talk. So, be mindful of that. Don't rush it. Allow the conversation to be natural and to peter out naturally. Don't try and police it like a typical meeting. It's not a typical meeting. typical corporate meeting. And finally, follow it up very quickly with a more structured discussion, because the first one will be messy, it will be uncomfortable, it will be untidy, it will be very uncorporate. So the next time you do have a meeting, make it more formal, follow it up quickly, ensure that the discussions and the outcomes of the initial meeting and the concerns that are raised, because many will be raised, are taken into account and addressed. So for me, those are the things that I think are probably worth bearing in mind when considering starting.
Thank you, Kate. I mean, so much advice in there. Thank you for your honesty. Since you've been talking, Richard has joined us. Richard, we're still on the first question, which is kind of, you know, where do you start? But if you want to also introduce yourself briefly to everybody, that'd be great.
Thank you, Carly. Good morning, and good morning, Kate, Uzma, and everyone on the line. So yeah, Richard Etienne. I work for the Department for International Trade. I'm also the BAME Network co-chair. And I just want to say from the outset that the views expressed in this webinar are mine and not that of the civil service. So yeah, question one. I'm really glad that this is the opener, because after the murder of George Floyd, this was the first question that came out. How can we actually talk about this and drive change? Three things, really. The first is to echo what Kate said, and it's about creating that safe space, because a lot of your Black colleagues, a lot of your Asian colleagues, we are going through pain. And so you need to come from a place of empathy, understanding. If it's easier to start at a local level, so just with your individual teams, then that's great. And then, you know, expanding to wider conversation is okay. The second thing is actually understanding, gaining some understanding, doing some research. One thing I've often said in a few drop-ins is that, you know, we're very capable of doing research on everyday things. If I'm traveling to Chile, you know, I'm going to pick up a Lonely Planet book, I'm going to search on Google. You know, we are all smart, intelligent people. If we want to find out some more information about a particular subject matter, we do the research. So please do your research. Try to work out the right terminology, the way to come at a conversation from a place of empathy. And then finally, it's just listen. I think, you know, listen to what your Black colleagues, your Asian colleagues are saying, and advocate for suggested changes as an ally. You know, don't limit your understanding, or don't limit your listening rather to just town halls or organizational wide meetings. Like, actively listen and invite targeted conversation. You know, it is a difficult conversation, and it will only be difficult until it's no longer difficult. So we need to keep engaging in that. Within the department I work for, as the BAME co-chair, we have hosted virtual drop-ins where anyone can join, and we do, as you know, to go back to that first point, we reiterate that it is a safe space. You know, we don't record any of our conversations as well. We just allow people to be open and free, and this way, you know, your colleagues, and I will use BAME even though I don't like it either. I'm with you, Kate. You know, your BAME colleagues will act as ambassadors to double your efforts to attract talent from these communities.
Thank you so much, Richard. And we might come back to, I know I've heard quite a few people saying they don't like the BAME terms, and we might come back to that as a question to get into a bit more later. So the next question, and I'll start with you, Richard. So what does the conversation look like?
So it's interesting because within my workplace, the most senior person, the most senior D&I champion is a white man. And after George Floyd's murder, he approached myself and my co-chair at the BAME Network and said, you know, you should put out a message. And to go back to the empathy piece, you know, what Kate said earlier, we were in pain. Like, we were literally in pain. We felt like this was not ours to even begin with. I'm even tripping over my words just from, you know, kind of reliving this. And the analogy I used, and you probably heard it in different ways, but imagine my house is burning, right? My house is burning. Someone else has set fire to my house. Now, normally, you know, I can manage the fires, but this one is ablaze, and I can't handle it. So I'm asking for help. Fire brigade turns up. Fireman, white guy, turns up and he's like, "Oh, well, we didn't start this fire. Someone else started this fire. You know, our ancestors started this fire. Surely, like, you can tell us how we can put this out, because, yeah, you know, you've been dealing with this for so long." It's like, dude, I cannot handle it. I need your help. You have the equipment. I can see the fire truck behind you. Like, help us. And they don't. And, you know, the next day, house is completely burned. And, you know, families driving past and going, "Wow, look at that. That's so unfortunate." And they just keep going. Like, we're tired. Our house has been completely burnt down, and it's continually being burnt down. And so it's important that our white allies speak up and speak first, because we as the oppressed cannot fight the structures, the systemic racial structures that keep us oppressed. So it needs to start there. It needs to start with allies, and allies need to keep it going.
Thank you, Rich. That's a really strong message that we've got to go first. Uzma, over to you to build on that question.
Thank you. And Richard, I'm really touched by what you're saying too, really compelling. I mean, you know, how does this conversation practically look like? You know, people, I've noticed, would rather have a conversation about any polarizing topic except for race, politics, gender, sexuality, anything else, because tough talk is scary. And for some, it's scary because there aren't clear-cut answers. And if you're a white leader, you may feel that you've got to toe the company's line on diversity, and you may be completely unaware and unprepared to actually acknowledge your own privilege. You may not be a racist, but you honestly don't understand what the problem is. And you know, this is all okay, because it means that this type of conversation takes courage. And both parties, as Kate was saying, feel probably emotionally exposed and raw, given. And it's because of how difficult these conversations are that many people shy away from what actually could be life-changing for some people. And I honestly believe that you can learn the skills to have them. Don't have to be in the dark. So a couple of tips that I've picked up and that I would like to share are: state your goal. So number one, state your goal. I previously had a call with a leader specifically because she wanted to basically learn what her team thought about her leadership style for 100 countries globally. And I thought, great, you know, it's a good intention, and state your goal. So what I mean by that is be transparent about your intention to have a dialogue or to create a survey. Take the time to explain to the concerned, you know, why you want to do this. And, you know, in your enthusiasm to make change happen, the worst thing you can do is grab a person of color on the way to their next meeting or tack it onto the end of a call. And, you know, it's just not right. And I would also like to point out, please don't assume that every person of color feels the same way or thinks the same way. So my second tip is focus on impact rather than intent. And I know, Carly, you and I, we've talked about this in different situations, but, you know, essentially I'd describe it as, how does this person in front of me feel if I say this, rather than, I've got honest intentions and I must express this. And there's a real difference between the two. So I'd advise you to step into that person's shoes, the person who is impacted by what you want to say, and challenge yourself to see the world from their perspective. You know, the worst case scenario in response to offensive behavior is to say something like, oh, Fred's a nice guy. He didn't mean that. He's honestly a really nice guy. And I just want to outline, what does that mean? Like, so when that happens, that's like an automatic leap of judgment into Fred's intent. You know, you can't speak for Fred. You don't know what he was thinking, what he was intending. And you can't question as well someone's experience of how Fred made them feel. So it's tricky. And my third point is, you know, be open, really simple, but be open to learning on both sides. You know, you don't have all the answers. And I really love this phrase that I came across recently: we're all experts in our lived experiences. It's quite powerful. And I actually found these principles really useful when I led a set of discussions on microaggressions. And apart from the, you know, educational piece about what it is, what I tried to do was to inject a sense of discovery, you know, that this is about learning. I did that by building in plenty of time for reflection exercises. You know, I don't know if this is the case for you, Richard, and for you, Kate, too, but all too often people come to these things because they're interested, but they don't understand that they are personally accountable for making that action and that change happen. So to counteract this, I was bold and I explicitly asked, how can you create a safe space to support others speaking up? And I found that was quite useful. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, Yusma. I know that we've talked a lot about considering the impact that you, even though you feel like you're coming from a good place with good intent, actually it's about considering the impact on people, and you've helped me understand that recently.
Thank you.
Kate, over to you to build on that question.
Their take on that particular question. From my perspective, I want people to consider the organization. So with the recent events that have taken place, I've seen a lot of jumping on bandwagons, specifically on social media channels with the blackout that happened a couple of months ago. And there seems to be this willingness, or should we say drive, to be like Google or like Nike or like Ben and Jerry's, or, you know, any of the organizations that are doing it well, should we say. But, you know, we're not all Google and we're not all Ben and Jerry's. And I think you have to think about that, the environment you're in. There's no point in trying to be something you're not. So if your organization is quite formal, quite structured, you know, quite corporate, shall we say, for want of a better word, then you have to consider that. You know, you cannot make your organization into something it isn't. You have to be authentic. Otherwise, whatever you do is going to come across as disingenuous. So it's really important to consider the conversation will take the shape of the lived experiences. It will be dictated by the experiences in the room, so to speak. So if your experiences are bad, you have to be prepared for that and acknowledge it somehow, but take it on board and own it, be accountable for that. Why is it the way it is? If you're in a situation, you're in an environment that's quite negative, or shall we say not receptive to change in regard to this particular subject matter, and if they're not, then I would question why you even bother it. And I don't mean to sound overtly negative when I say that. I'm trying to say is you can't do everything yourself, especially if you're in a communication or a sector, what you can do. So if the leadership team are not this, then I wouldn't put myself out to the extent where you might damage your own well-being to make this happen. I would move on, perhaps, if it's not an environment that I was comfortable in. And it's taken me a long time to come to that realization. If you'd asked me this question, you know, 5 years ago, I would say something different. I'd say, try and make it work, persevere, persist. You know, what's wrong with you? You know, try and make it change. But you can't do that. It's simply not possible. So the sea of change must be there already in order for change to be affected. If it's not, then you're fighting a losing battle, essentially. And then I would say, just let the voices that are in the room dictate the conversation. Try to allow them to create the context. Maybe Uzma, you might be angry with me when I say this, but I don't agree with your stating what's your goal, because I feel that frames it in some way, and this is such a raw subject matter that's so difficult to broach. I think that would actually be counterproductive. I just feel that a conversation, a very raw and honest conversation, needs to happen first before any agendas are set. So the conversation, what does it look like? It looks quite messy and quite uncontrolled, and quite goalless. But ultimately, the goal is, without stating it, to just understand the experiences that people have had, and how they feel about those experiences. So that's my take on that particular question.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks for your honesty and sharing. And it's great that we've got a panel with different perspectives. This is the whole point of the conversation. So final question before we look at some of the questions from our guests. And I'll start with you, Kate. So I guess it's important that it's not just a one-off conversation. So how do you keep it going?
How do you keep it going? I would say, have that initial, when I said initially, to have that initial raw conversation, that discussion, which was going to be messy and difficult, and all of those great things that will ultimately move things forward. Follow it up. So have regular meetings, put them in the diary, put them in the calendar, so they're always there, and be prepared to get behind that. Don't allow it to fall by the wayside, because often with these things, it's perceived to be a nice to have. If there's something going on with it, that's just a meeting about race, or it's just a D&I thing. We don't need to worry about that. We've got business to talk about. But this is business. Research after research after research project has shown that organizations that are open and receptive to having a diverse and inclusive environment do better, perform better, make more revenue, are better perceived from a branding perspective. So this is business. So when you hear that term, it's always wise to address it in that way and say, actually, what we're doing is moving the business in the right direction. So follow it up with regular meetings, put them in the calendar. I agree with Uzma when she said leadership has to be behind this. If you don't have your leaders behind it, or, as I said before, you're fighting a losing battle, and you may need to just put it to one side, or if you don't feel comfortable in the environment, move to an organisation where D&I is taken seriously. So leaders need to be behind it. They need to be accountable. They need to drive the actions, the planning and the actions. And they need to talk about it regularly. Speaking is so powerful. As Uzma said, reiterating people's names, talking about Black employees, advocating for Black employees, putting, Black people's faces and names on the map, is really important, because it just doesn't happen at the moment. And people are afraid to use the term Black, even for myself, stalling, when I say it, it's Black. Black is a reality, and all of this BAME nonsense, it just doesn't, just speak the truth, and be honest about it, and talk about the plans, and talk about Blackness and Black people and what you're doing for your Black population. It's really key. And probably my last point would be to provide a download at executive meetings to make sure that those C-suite sessions that are taking place, be it a monthly meeting or a weekly meeting with the very top of the organization, make sure it's on the agenda, and make sure that all of those outcomes from those meetings that you're putting in the calendar regularly are fed back to that group. And it's always on the top, on the table as a topic for discussion. and that it gets followed up on, so that people cannot allow it to fall by the wayside, because it's always on the agenda and it's always considered to be a priority. Those would be the things that I would suggest for keeping the conversation going.
Thanks, Kate. Loads of great advice in there. Richard, is there anything to build on Kate's answer there into how to keep the conversation going?
Yeah, I would definitely say, again, it's three things come to mind here, and actually links quite nicely with Uzma's point about impact over intent. And the first is, let it influence policy. So within our department, we have created a manifesto that's gone to our executive committee with pledges. And these things have to be as part of policy and in line managers' objective setting, and so that their teams can hold them to account. And there are consequences if these measures aren't met. The second is becoming an active ally. So you're a white colleague and you're in a room full of other white people, and you hear someone say something that could be racist. Ask questions. Sorry, can you repeat that? You know, or what did you mean by that? Like, get them to actually be an active ally, and also call it out when you see it. It's important to do that, and obviously then there's the education piece first. You know, so one can identify what a microaggression or any act of racism looks like, and then finally is on that piece education, but on a personal level. I would say, you know, I have a 10-year-old son, and I remember when I was 10, my father had to talk to me about racism and how I should conduct myself, especially with police and so forth, so that I don't get on the wrong side of the law for no fault of my own. And so, you know, as our white colleagues, allies, have discussions with your children. You know, it's never too early, in my opinion. And, you know, obviously do it in a way that is inclusive and doesn't create fear, because this is not what this conversation is about. We're not trying to do an us and them. It's about understanding what the world looks like now and what we need to do to change it. So those are my 3 things.
Thanks, Richard. And a really important point about being an active ally. You know, if we don't start calling it out now, then, you know, we're not going to be able to make change. And Uzma, over to you. Same question. How do you keep the conversation going?
You know, out of the 3 questions, how do you keep the conversation going is like the most challenging and the most important question, I think. And I want to start by kind of saying what my prediction is. My prediction is that as the mass media coverage of the Black Lives Matter movement starts to wane over the summer, people who aren't directly affected by this, by racism, will start to turn their attention more towards more pressing business matters like the coronavirus response or the Brexit response. And for the people who are affected, I just want to outline that it's important to recognize that it never goes away. And so I think everyone on this call knows that, sadly, and my heart really, I feel so heavy-hearted, but sadly, that no matter how much we hope that there won't be another George Floyd in, I think there will be. And when that happens, it will cause anger and outrage. And employees will look back into their employers and their companies and expect some answers. And who will be tasked with actually formulating and expressing these answers? It's probably going to be a lot of us on the call. So PR, internal comms, engagement specialists, diversity, HR specialists. And you know, if there's a developing level of self-awareness of this issue in organizations between now and then, like the next incident, it means that we can avoid this token PR that I think Kate was alluding to. And to me, these are gestures that are sometimes just band-aid solutions to true change and true diversity. I mean, you know, a black square can raise awareness, but it needs to be part of a more robust strategy for change. And so, you know, how can you create and sustain change? Good communicators will know basically that organizations need to avoid like these peaks and these troughs in any business change, and race is no exception to that. We can't actually predict when this next incident will happen globally, and everyone feels inflamed again. But in order to keep that conversation going, I think we need to keep a constant drumbeat of communications that supports the interventions that are basically being planned now, or hopefully are being planned now. So like, you know, if we take mandatory training on unconscious bias, for example, as a potential intervention, this is controversial, but I don't think it creates the benefits that a lot of organizations think it does. With something like race, I think it's important to have like two-way or multi-way dialogue in the safe spaces that we've just been talking about. I'm not a big fan of like classroom style or learning or self-learning on this, because I don't think it helps people to uncover the biases that they never knew that they had. And with my coaching role on, or my coaching hat on, it's the coaching conversations that do that. So how else can you keep the conversation going? Another thing that I've observed, which I find is positive, is that the conversation on race is being kept alive not only with current employees, but with former employees as well. So alumni are being asked to contribute their views on the culture of their former organizations. And, you know, I find it really positive. And it's progress that leadership teams are asking questions like, you know, could race have played a factor in their former employees' departure? That's a big question to be asking. It's a good one. And, you know, do we have an adequate succession plan for people of color for the future? And, you know, is there a place for positive discrimination? And, you know, where else in the employee life cycle do we need to identify changes? You know, what could we start changing that's in our control and our gift? And so, you know, I love that there's so much chat going on. We'll come to the questions, but people on this call will be able to share concrete examples too about how to keep the conversation going. But I just want to say that I don't think this is a quick fix issue. You know, it's about shifting mindsets. And, you know, I think that really takes energy and commitment. So thank you.
Definitely, Uzma, energy, commitment and investment as well, which I think a lot of businesses are perhaps want to maybe do the bare minimum, but actually it's going to take a lot more than that. So we have some questions which I'm going to go over to, and it looks like the most popular question is from May. Thank you, May. So going back to the topic of terminology. So if BAME isn't useful, what should or can we use when talking to colleagues of colour? Who on our panel would like to answer that first? Richard, over to you, Richard.
Thank you for that question. And it could be just something as simple as asking an individual what they identify as. And I know that I like that question because my identity has been a bit lost for until quite recently. I thought, you know, identified Black British, but then I found out about my Dominican roots, and now I'm really close to my Dominican roots, and I feel like my heritage is there, and that's what defines me and makes me who I am. My lived experience as a Black man is very different from the lived experience of my Thai friends. And so to, you know, lump us in this kind of homogenous group with this term is not helpful. The stats don't tell the true story. Certain figures are skewed one way or the other. We have, I think, potentially our last census coming up in 2021. And so it'd be interesting to see how the ONS categorize racial or ethnic groups in that. But yeah, I think it's just, again, just asking someone, like, you know, how do you like to be identified?
Thank you, Richard. Uzma, Kate, any other perspectives?
You know what? I'm going to let Kate go on this because, to be honest, for me, I really don't mind being called BAME, person of color, anything, but anything that starts to distinguish me from, You know, like I was saying about we're all similar. You know, let's not focus on the differences. Call me anything you like there. There is a difference. So yeah, I've got no strong opinion on it.
Thanks, Isma.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Richard in that I think it has to be an individual decision on how you want to be addressed. But I like the term black and people of color. People of color, you know, everyone has their own opinion, but black is a word that people are afraid to utter because it speaks to so much pain and so much trauma. I suspect that's one of the reasons why people dislike it as a word, but I like the word black. I never used to when I was younger, but I think it's a word that describes a group of people who have a particular grievance currently. We're not Asian, you know, we're not you know, any other kind of group that could be targeted as BAME. We are black, and we have a particular lived experience that needs to be acknowledged and needs to be addressed. So we go with black for black people per se. The rest of it, you know, is up to the individual, as Richard said.
Thanks, Kate. And a question from Russell Olivia. So would it be possible to articulate the specific problems it causes in terms of the impact on people's day-to-day working lives and long-term career prospects? So I assume by it, Russell Olivia, you're meaning, I guess, racism, or I guess not talking about race in the workplace. Do you comment if that's correct or not? Who would like to take that question?
I'll take it. Oh, as I'm thinking about it aloud, you know, when I held a few discussions, facilitated discussions specifically on microaggressions, it was amazing what people who were impacted by it said. You know, I had predicted that they would say something like, well, I don't feel very comfortable. I don't go the extra mile. I don't volunteer for opportunities. You know, I don't put myself forward for things. But actually, in two different groups, it was really borne out that actually they felt very isolated. I say they, or, you know, the people participated said that they felt really uncomfortable. They felt, one person said they felt invisible. Can you imagine invisible at work? So that will have an impact on every other area. And, you know, this is not something that we can ignore. You know, we live in a globalized society. We are pretty much working as knowledge workers where exchange of information is really important. And the way it might show is that if someone has something very important to say and they don't feel comfortable in, say, an all-white environment, they may withhold that information. It could be important market information. It could be about trends that they've seen. It could be competitor info, anything, because in this world that we're living in, it's all about exchanging. So that's, and I think what I'm seeing as well, a trend that I talked about with Kate on a recent podcast that we did together, is you're seeing more flatter organizations, so less kind of pyramid style and more cross-functional working. You've got to trust your colleagues, and if you feel uncomfortable, or, you know, a few people of color don't feel comfortable talking about some difficult issues, I think once you talk about them, you'll create more trust. So there's a benefit there. But yeah, I think I was personally more than shocked to see those answers that were, you know, quite hard hitting, people feeling isolating and feeling invisible. And that's not a way, you know, it's not a way to behave, especially when you think about all the organizations who've got like values and mission statements that say we want all our employee voices to be heard, to be recognized, to be supported.
Definitely. Richard, did you want to build on that?
Yeah, thanks, Carly. For me as well, and you know, to follow on to Uzma's point, it's about bringing your whole self to work. And the problem with racism, microaggressions, it prevents someone like me bringing my whole self to work. I feel I have to dial certain bits down or completely hide parts altogether. And case in point was the weekend So the Monday after the George Floyd murder, I attend the weekly call with other heads of, and it was all, how was your weekend? Oh, it's great, yeah, da 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 da. And then, it comes round to a black woman who's on the call, and she said, I had an awful weekend. I spent the entire weekend crying, actually, because of George Floyd's murder. And then she left a pause. I think it was about 5 to 8 seconds, but it felt like a minute. And then she continued. And no one said anything about it afterwards. And I mean, that alone is just, how can you have one of your colleagues say that, right? And no one pick it up. No one say anything. And yeah, that's an example of the problem it can cause.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective,
had a similar experience. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Carly. And thanks for that, Richard. I really appreciate you saying that, because I also had an awful weekend at that time, and I cried. I spent the weekend crying as well. It was horrible. My family was distraught. And in terms of microaggressions, there's nothing micro about them. People talk about the term micro, but they're not. They may well be micro to the outside, but to the person experiencing it, it's certainly not micro. And it's like death by 1,000 cuts. Lots of little tiny incisions made in your skin every single day, and months and years go by. And before you know it, you look and you've got a gaping wound in your body that is going to take some work to heal. So I've been called many times aggressive. I've been told I'm too strong, too ambitious, and I have the double whammy because I'm a woman too, and women aren't allowed to be ambitious. I've been bossy. I've been chastised many times for all of those things, and they're almost certainly all related to my blackness. So you can imagine that there's a certain group of people in your organization who are experiencing that daily, and I would say it's as frequent as daily. Then you can imagine the impact going forward. Forget about attrition and talent acquisition and all of that. I'm talking about feelings and what that does to someone. So mental health, depression, etc. It all has an effect over a long period of time. So do you really want people to be suffering in that way in your organization? That's the effect of microaggression.
Thank you, Kate, for sharing your experience and being so honest about it. Next question from Johnny. So could one of the panelists talk about tokenism and how that has affected them? I know, Uzma, we had that conversation, didn't we, around always being chosen for a photo shoot.
That we thought about that at the same time.
And I would have been the one asking you.
Yeah. Why don't you explain that and I chip in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't, well, so you shared the story of it. It's only, so you've always been asked to appear in company photo shoots, and actually you were in some cases the only person of colour kind of on your floor or in your business. And obviously it's because the company wants to appear to be more diverse than it actually is. And in my old life as an internal comms pro in the corporate world, I would have been the one asking you to appear in that photo shoot, but being completely oblivious as to actually the impact of asking you time and time again, and actually what I was, contributing towards in doing that.
I loved it when we had this conversation, because I think I said that I will never do it again. And I think you asked me why, and it's part of my awakening, because what I realized, both, featuring in these photo shoots, but also later on, a few years later, actually commissioning them and thinking, oh my God, this is like an all white male kind of brochure or something. Actually, I actually felt like I was complicit, or I have been complicit in creating this invisible system, but that actually creates an illusion that, you know, an organization is actually colorful instead of colorblind. You know, there is diversity. We're going to show on the outside that this is the case, this PR around it. But actually, when it's very disappointing that when you go into organizations, and this is probably more my time more in London and actually in Europe as well, that very often there isn't anyone who looks anything like you, although on the front cover of this brochure it looks like there's at least two other people who might be your friends or know something about your experiences, or that you can share, you know, your inner thoughts or your microaggressions, or feel some kind of sympathy or empathy. And I think this is an example of where, if we just, all of us, think through our day-to-day life and think through the employee change cycle, what are the opportunities to change them? And I think where we can control it, like, you know, a photo shoot, we should think about it. And there's of course nothing from stopping anyone from saying, let's hire some external models to do the shoots or whatever instead of an employee. But I think, and in that case it's okay, but I think the whole thing needs to be part of a robust strategy. We can't just have this, I call it like fake advertising. So yeah, I have experience being a token, I guess, if you like. But also the question reminds me of experiences where in positive discrimination, sometimes a person of color might ask, did I just get this role because, am I a diversity hire? Have I got diversity on my forehead? You know, I think that's quite important. But there's a lot of pros and cons around positive discrimination. I'm sure other people will have opinions about it too.
Thanks, Usma. Kate or Richard, anything else to add to that question?
Yeah, thank you, Carly. Thank you, Uzma. I'm going to come at this from a different angle. So I used to be the Prime Minister's videographer, Theresa May, and I was the first Black videographer for any Prime Minister, and so far, no one's come since. So what I did, because that house is full of just white people, you know, I was the only Black male individual, civil servant, who was in that house, who didn't open doors and serve food. So every single time there was a reception, we went on a trip, we went to a business conference, and there were just a sea of white faces and a few Black people, and maybe a couple, you know, visibly disabled individuals and women. I would make sure that my videos was almost oversubscribed with these individuals. And I did it from an inspiration perspective. You will be what you can see. And I didn't want to limit people to thinking, oh, I can't work down the street, or I can't aspire to get to that place. So I was very conscious, actually, in my decision to include more people of color, more women, more visibly disabled individuals. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in just to mix it up a little bit.
Thanks for that, Richard. Kate, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not a fan, as an internal communicator, I'm not a fan of stock photos or constructed photos or anything accurate. I love, you know, as much authenticity as possible. So I would say, Yutunde mentioned in the chat that, you know, handpicking people for photoshops based on skin tone is, you know, not the way to go. Why not selected on a team? And that's exactly what my perception is of this particular subject is, you know, if you have a diverse group of employees, then you won't need to do the handpicking. You can just select from, you know, a group of people who are around you and at any one time. And I've worked for many organizations like that have good representation. And so I take it back to the point I made previously earlier on in our session that, you know, if your organization is not like that, then it's time to rethink your organization. Yes, you know, stock photos. I think there was a famous case, wasn't there, in the 1980s where Ford actually colored in, I think, or something bizarre like that, inserted in some random photos of Black people, inserted them into their own photos to make it look more diverse when they didn't actually work for them. So you can imagine how that is perceived by the workforce. So yeah, try as much as possible to have a diverse team. If not, then rethink your hiring, talent acquisition.
Thank you, Kate. We've got quite a few new questions. I'll go through them in order unless people want to upvote any of them if they're passionate about hearing the answer within the next 20 minutes. So I'll go for Lynn's question next. If groups naturally segregate based on their own individual experiences, how can an organisation create a truly inclusive environment without the traditional homogenous groups that tend to be created within a typical D&I structure, i.e. BAME, etc.? Who would like to take that question?
I'll kind of semi-answer that. You know, this idea of segregation, it's only come to my mind recently, but it's really important that we open our eyes to it and we become awake to it. And one thing that I was reading about recently was this idea about having volunteers as part of a mentoring program, where people who are quite different, who wouldn't maybe normally interact in work life. So for example, minority women with white men in senior leadership. And the idea there is to kind of break down barriers and just to have conversations about their experiences and to create dialogue and learn from each other. I think that would also, a sort of secondary benefit would be opportunities that maybe were not open before become more available and more visible for the people of color, and also maybe more engagement and sort of inclusion into when that, say, senior white male leader is talking about D&I, that he can actually draw on the experiences, the reality experiences of the people that he knows in his work group. I thought that was quite a nice, it sounds like quite an easy one to create. You could start small and you could scale that up. But I think it has to come with a shift of mindset, a kind of awakening. It can't just happen. You can't force people to do this. And I've said before that being an ally, it's a great thing, but it's a choice. You've got to want to do it.
Definitely, Isma. Kate, Richard, anything to build on that? Move on to the next question. So a question from Harpreet, otherwise known as Happy. Hey, Happy. What specific action could be taken to tackle systemic racism in the workplace that could really help convince leadership that they too are accountable for making a change?
So I'll start in terms of recruitment and development. So what this manifesto, and this is myself as the BAME co-chair, stipulates is that there needs to be diverse panel members, especially in particular higher grades, because at the moment it's only specific. The only requirement is that it has to be gender mixed. And that, you know, having a diverse panel with different race, ethnic groups is helpful in terms of allowing the interviewee to see the intent and impact of, the impact over the intent, as Uzma said, of an inclusive culture, a diverse culture from the outset. So they've walked through the door, and it's not that they've just seen a black or brown person at reception. Actually, they're behind the table influencing the decision making at a very high level. So that does something great psychologically to that individual. And I actively volunteer to participate as an interview panelist for that reason. It kind of goes back to that Downing Street example I said. I feel like until there is that change, you almost kind of have to do what you can to show what it could look like, all right? So I do what I can at a local level, and I work with those at a senior level to ensure that it becomes part of the culture. So, and so that's the recruitment side of things. But in terms of development, it's about actively putting your Black, brown colleagues, into certain programs that will help to accelerate their development. Because we know that simply just turn up to work and working really hard and applying for this and that job, that's not what gets you truly ahead. It's about who you know as well as what you know. And actually being part of these programs, and it gives you face time with certain individuals who are influential and possibly haven't seen people like me in certain environments and teams. And they then find a level of comfort talking with you where they may not have in the past. It could be as simple as that. I grew up in an area without Black people, so I don't really know how to flex and engage. But for me, there's that local piece, but then also influencing the top level as well.
Thanks, Richard. Usma, Kate, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I would say there just has to be a willing to change things, and there has to be an understanding or an acknowledgement that there is an issue, there's a problem, there's a challenge that needs to be addressed. And if they come at it from that perspective, then there's some hope. But if they are very much ostrich with their head in the sand, then it's going to be an uphill struggle and almost a waste of time, because there won't be any kind of energy behind making things change or moving, transition in the organization from one state to another, from one poor state to a better state. So yeah, for me, it has to be the willingness to do something about it, and acknowledgement firstly, and then willingness to move the dial. And then Richard said something interesting just now, which sort of piqued my interest about leaders. We all know that most leaderships are white, middle class, and male, and in most instances they haven't mixed with Black people growing up, or they don't have Black people in their social circles. And for me, that's always going to be a problem. You cannot be inclusive and sort of be an advocate for diversity from 9 to 5 and then go home and then sort of be something else. It just doesn't work. It's going work. So for me, there's something to do with leadership, the talent acquisition phase, the having those awkward discussions perhaps when they are talking to senior leaders about the kind of circles they mix in, the kind of books they read. It sounds a bit strange to think in that way, or to perhaps do that, because everyone goes on, especially at that level. But there has to be some experience that will lend itself to moving the organization forward. If there is an experience, then there's not going to be the willingness, and that for me is a really important thing. That's a kind of an elephant in the room.
Definitely. Thank you, Kate. Is there anything to add to that?
No, that's awesome. I was thinking sometimes you can tell a lot about somebody's intention by listening to how they speak about the topic. So my advice to the person who asked the question is, while you're interacting with the leaders about it, just keep your ears open about whether you're hearing phrases like I mentioned, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. And I've got a few phrases here that kind of, I saw a talk which was fantastic. I can recommend it, by Robin DiAngelo, about deconstructing racism. But the kind of very superficial things that people, I'm sorry, but white people will say when you talk to them about race, or just generally how they feel, which is, race doesn't have any meaning to me. Racism is in the past. I see people as individuals. My parents were not racist, so I am not. Everyone struggles, but if you worked hard, ... And these are just phrases that I'm saying at this moment. Just see if you are hearing those, because they might be a bit symptomatic and can help you diagnose a little bit about what the issue could be, which is saying that, you know, like the CEO of Starbucks said it, I'm colorblind, I don't see race. But and a lot of people will say it, but it's kind of, it's a problem because you have to see race, you have to see the color in order to make the action happen. So I think it's a combination of, if you are doing workshops and there is evidence to show that employees are suffering and it's having an impact, then it's, you know, I wonder as well, at the same time, thinking off the top of my head, but could you involve those leaders in workshops, give them a sort of fly on the wall kind of role, so they can really feel and experience someone else's perspective, not necessarily that they're in there in their role as a leader, right? You know, this is, I'm going to take charge of this, but actually they're in the background and they can hear firsthand experiences, which has been effective in my last organization.
Thank you for sharing those examples, Uzma. It might be a good idea for you to add in the chat that resource that you were talking about. Yeah, people found that interesting. Okay, so a question, probably the last couple of questions. So a question from Basak. How should organisations go about actively hiring a truly diverse workforce? Would this go a long way to combat some of those feelings of invisibility and isolation Uzma mentioned?
Oh no, I can't multitask. I'm writing chat.
Oh yes,
Can someone...
So the question is about how to actively hire a truly diverse workforce. I don't know whether, Richard, you have some perspective on that.
Sure, thanks, Carly. Thank you, Basak. Wow, okay, so there's a couple of things. First of all, how you outreach, how you actually reach and target you know, diverse communities or specific ethnic minority groups. Another term, oh gosh, is language. Okay, so in your job descriptions, also, you know, be mindful about, you know, if you know the stats about the education system, if you are specifically asking for individuals who have a particular degree from a particular institution, if you are only doing outreach programs in particular socioeconomic areas, you know, you are overlooking a vast amount of talent from my community, and that will have an impact, a negative impact for individuals like myself, a negative impact economically. I'm sure I heard earlier actually the amount, you know, the GDP that is lost in this country because of a lack of investment in BAME talent. So, you know, look at that wording, look at that terminology. Almost, it goes back to Yetunde's point about the team that puts together design briefs, the team that puts together the job applications, the team that that's involved in the interview process from start to finish. You know, we're talking the whole journey. Like, assess that. You know, organizations, if they don't have particular talent, they get non-executive directors in. Like, you just get people in. You can't use that excuse of, we don't have any black and brown people in our organization. Somebody knows someone. Do research. It always goes back to that. If your intent is there, then move with that impact. I'm just using impact over intent. I love that. I'm just going to use it all day. So yeah, I think I'll stop there on that. My friends jump in.
Thank you, Richard. Kate, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I think I agree with Richard and Uzma's points. Really good points they've mentioned, but I think it goes back to, and I know I keep going back to my original points, but it does go back to the networks that people belong to, that work for the organization. So if you are recruiting, then you should have already people who have networks that include people from other ethnic minority groups. You know, the diversity should be built in from the talent that's already residing in the organization. So if you've got that already, then you're in a good position. If you have an employee base that only socializes with people who look like them, eat like them, walk like them, talk like them, then you're going to have a problem. It will be an uphill struggle. So I would say build the diversity and inclusion acquisition in your acquisition from day one. So even if you are acquiring talent that's white, inevitably that will always the majority of the organization. Because of the numbers of Black people who reside here, it will be more difficult because it's small, the pool that you're looking for. But if you have already white people who are receptive and have a wide social circle and are willing to other people, hear other perspectives, hear other opinions, then you've got a good basis on which to build your Black and Asian and disabled and gay, etc. population from there.
Thank you, Kate. I'm probably just going to add one last question, and then we'll perhaps do just final reflections. So, question from Lizzie. So, do you think it's useful for white colleagues to understand more about the specific heritage of their individual Black or BAME colleagues? I find it interesting personally, and it helps me learn more, but it sails close to the, in inverted commas, where are you from, really from question, or being a cultural tourist. Thoughts, question mark.
Oh, I have to take this one. I have to take this one because that is the question I get asked all the time. Where are you from? And I just want to explain why I would say I would term it as a bit of a microaggression, not in itself. So what happens is in a bid to, when people want to make a personal connection with me, hey, where are you from? And if I say I'm British, often it doesn't cut it, and people want to press and ask, no, where are you really from? And it really depends on the context and my mood. But at work, for example, if I'm asked that, and if that answer isn't good enough, I tend to see it as a bit of a microaggression, because what it makes me feel, the impact of that question is, hold on, you don't look, in my mind, I have a view of what a British person looks like. 86% is Caucasian in the UK. And you're telling me that you are British, but this doesn't compute with me. So where are you really from? What's your heritage? And when I hear that, that's how I perceive it. And I start to feel like I don't belong in this country, or in my country of birth. Like I don't have a right to be there, because the person who's asking me, this is their unconscious manifestation, their view, their worldview of what is positive and negative and what's superior and inferior. Even though it's a very innocuous question, the impact is, it's quite damaging. And I think we've talked through it, which is microaggressions are continuous. So if you get every day in and out of work in any country you're in, and you're pressed further, it kind of wears you down. And I've seen and I've heard actually from colleagues and from white colleagues telling me about their Black colleagues, is that actually they see body language that's like closed up, and real reluctance. And so my white colleagues are saying, hey, I'm just asking, I have got this curiosity. I love all kinds of people. And that's great. That's a good intention. Like I was saying, it's a good intention. But the impact, when you put yourself in that person's shoes and you challenge yourself to look from their perspective, it's wearing. So if they give you an answer that actually they are from whatever country, then you have to just leave it at that. And when they trust you, when they open up and you develop a relationship with them, then that's the point, they will tell you themselves. And the saddest thing, I have to say, that I came across in a workshop was when somebody who was Chinese heritage, but who had spent years in, I think in California and in Europe, she actually shut down and said, I'm Chinese, because she was tired of being asked again and again and not being believed about where she was really from. And I actually find it tragic.
Mm. I know that Kate and Richard, you'll have a perspective on that as well, but we have run out of time.
Oh, no. Sorry about that.
No, but
My
thank you so
passion.
much. Yes, no, you're absolutely fine, Uzma. So before everybody leaves, we do have a quick poll, so please don't disappear. So, I mean, my final reflections are, I mean, oh my God, there was just so much to take on board there, and I need to watch this back and kind of really absorb it all. And there were just so many kind of so much great advice about how we can tackle this in our workplace. So thank you so much, Kate, Uzma, Richard. Really appreciate you making the time for this today, and thank you for everybody who joined and all of your questions. We're going to use all of this information to create a how to talk about race in the workplace, a guide that we'll email to everybody, and the questions that we didn't get round to in the comments, we'll address some of those in that guide. But Kate, Uzma and Richard, would you like to share your final reflections?
I actually think that this was a really important discussion, and I want to say thank you to you, Carly, actually, because without you having seen that need in the last Barn to Boardroom event, that there's a real appetite to raise this, we wouldn't be here. And I just hope that people see that we are all on a learning journey, and there is no right or wrong answer. We're learning as we go, but it's really important that we continue this conversation. And I really hope that you feel a little bit more confident to broach the subject after today. So thank you.
Definitely, Uzma. Thank you so much. Kate?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to extend my thanks to you, Carly, also for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to put my viewpoints forward. And I think it's been a useful conversation. I would say, I don't know if anyone recalled, there was a BT advert many years ago, which featured the scientist Stephen Hawking. And he used to say at the end, no matter what, we have to keep talking. And it's not a one-off conversation. You must keep talking in order to affect change, in order to make things different to how they are today. The conversation needs to continue. So I would say to all the participants, the first thing you should consider is how to keep the conversation going, to drive the conversation forward, to drive change, to be very persistent about setting those meetings, putting them in the diary, holding leadership to account, and to making sure the organization doesn't leave it behind, doesn't think it's something that should be knocked off the table whenever it suits. But yeah, really good discussion, really good questions and comments, and let's keep the conversation going, as Uzma said.
Definitely, Kate. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, just to echo everyone, Kate and Uzma's words, really, thank you for being an authentic ally, Carly, and for giving us the space to have this conversation. And thanks to everyone for their questions and comments. I would definitely echo Kate's point about having this keeping this conversation going, and I would just add to that, just accept there really is a problem. We don't need any more data. There's enough out there. So yeah, please keep this conversation going, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you to everyone joining today. We're just going to launch a very quick poll. It's only 2 questions. Yes, you'll hear from us again. We'll send around the guide. We'll make the recording available because there was just so much amazing advice in there. So definitely needs a rewatch. Thanks for voting, everybody. Thanks, Nish. Thanks, Sabrina, for your comments. Okay, so I think everybody's voted. So I think I'll end that. And I'll share the results. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.